Before we begin, I wanted to thank you all for the support that you've been giving me over the last 8 months. As a thank you to everyone who has been watching the videos without ad block or have directly supported the channel financially, I'm giving away a free combat patrol to a random viewer of the channel. There's going to be more information about this at the end of the video, so make sure you stick around until then. Hello everyone, I have a special video for you all today. Over the last month or so, I have been working behind the scenes on remaking the Adeptus Custodes Codex. As many of you may know, the Custodes Codex was not very well received by a lot of the community, and I felt like it was lacking in quite a few places. Now, I don't personally play Adeptus Custodes, but they are one of my favorite factions in the game, and I was disappointed with the end product of what their codex gave us. Personally, I felt like the goal of the codex that we got for Custodes was more designed to weaken Custodes instead of expanding on new playstyle options and bringing them to a proper state. I've mentioned this a couple of times in previous videos, but when I was going to college, I studied game design. And so I wanted to take a swing at redoing this codex the way that I think that it should have been handled as a game designer. Before I jump into it, there are a couple of disclaimers that I have to make very clear. Number one is that good game design is much harder than people give credit for. It can be very easy to overlook something when you are trying to work with a lot of different rules all at once. The codex that I'm presenting today has had glaring issues on its first draft that were very easy for me to overlook because 40k just has so many different rules that interact in weird and unique ways, and there might be some stratagems or keywords that you just don't realize that something already might have access to because of some weird rule that maybe your army doesn't use very often. Number two, the core fundamental design for 40k is very bad for iterative testing and design. The length of time that a typical 40k game takes means that it's going to be much harder to get a good amount of reps in to make sure that things feel balanced. Tabletop games are also harder to record good data on than digital games, especially once dice are involved. Number three, I have the benefit of hindsight. I get to see how the community feels about the rules and know that they are too weak. I don't have to worry about something I missed breaking the game and ruining the play experience for everyone else. Number four, I will be working within the design headspace of the original creator. I do have 2 additional detachments that are not in the current codex, but I wanted to try to keep the core idea of the detachments that already exist in place because the ideas themselves aren't bad, the execution just kind of fell a little short. And number 5, I appreciate any of you who might think that my end product is better than the actual Custodes Codex. And if you think that it's worse, please let me know. But do not use this as any sort of proof that designers are incapable. I do not want anyone to be harassed over this because of the first 3 points that I listed. If you want to download this version of the codex for yourself, I will have 2 separate links to PDFs in the description. One will be with designer commentary in case you want to see my thoughts or any kind of intent that I might have missed or made a little unclear in the rules, and I will have one without so that you can just very easily go through the rules. Starting off changes that I made to the army, I brought back the 3rd kata stance Catpro. I found that the way that the current codex is handling martial katas leads to less interesting choices being made. While each individual unit getting its own kata sounds good on paper, when the choices are either do more damage or do more damage, then mathematically speaking, the choice is made for you. If you wound on 5s, you are always going to pick lethal hits. If you wound on 3s, you are always going to pick sustained hits. This doesn't lead to interesting choices. It is binary. By returning the state of the katas back to an army-wide buff instead of unit by unit, and giving the -1 to hit and melee back means that now there is a actual cost to the decision that you make. If you have units that are in combat with something that they wound on 5s, but then you have other units that are in combat with something they wound on 3s, and maybe you're in against something that can be very threatening to you in melee, you have to make a very conscious decision of what target is the most important one for you to deal with, which means that there's an opportunity cost now to be had elsewhere. In order to have this change and make sure that the power of the army wasn't super sky high, I did have to make a change to the shield captains to reduce their overwhelming power by getting rid of their access to being able to have every kata active at the same time. Moving on to the first detachment that's going to be inside of the codex is the Shield Host detachment. Now, I wanted to revive the Index detachment to what it was meant to be, a more defensively oriented detachment for generic Custodes units. While the new Codex Shield Host detachment is still in my codex, it has been renamed and designed to fit that more offensive style that it's emulating with its sort of Golden Wa turn. Now, the Index detachment was objectively too strong. It was incredibly oppressive for other melee factions and way too durable for armies that relied on mortal wounds or devastating wounds to get a lot of their damage in. To remedy this, I've gone through and I've nerfed the Feel No Pain to make it more of a weakness for Custodes, while still having this Feel No Pain exist for players who want a more durable Custodian. I've also gone through and removed Fights First to reduce the strength against melee armies for this specific detachment. Other detachments will have access to this, but it means that you are giving up that natural bulk. Moving on to the Auric Champions detachment, this is my single favorite detachment concept from the codex that we actually got from Games Workshop, but I felt that it fell very short in its execution. The current detachment rule being +1 to wound means that on average, your characters are going to get about 1 extra wound when they attack in melee. This is just simply not a strong enough rule to fit a Hero Hammer style detachment where these characters are supposed to feel very meaningful and powerful. In my mind, Auric Champions and any kind of Hero Hammer detachment is meant to break the fundamental rules of 10th edition list building. I have tried to accomplish this by allowing the player to buy more than 3 enhancements for their army, and also enabling them to buy duplicate enhancements to create very critical decisions during that list building step, which is what Hero Hammer feels like it's meant to be. Being able to give multiple characters in your army access to things like Lone Op, extra durability, extra attacks, or better mobility means that you can give better defined roles to the individual characters that you are going to be spamming in this detachment. The increasing cost also means that there will not be an objectively best choice to give the same enhancement every single time. If you are giving out the 4th Light of the Emperor enhancement, it's going to cost you 40 points. And that is a huge difference in terms of what you can afford versus the very first Relentless Combatant costing you 10 points. Additionally, the change that I made to Shoulder the Mantle made it my absolute favorite stratagem in this book that I've made. Having Custodes take up the roles of those who have fallen in combat feels like what you would expect from these very hyper-elite soldiers. Giving those newly promoted characters the choice to lead or not means the characters that want to be on their own can be on their own, whether it's because they are a better unit on their own, they have the Lone Op keyword, or you just want to be able to keep this stronger overall bulk unit safe in the back. Now, this stratagem does run the risk of quote-unquote character batteries, where you'd be hiding Custodes units behind cover to just res a character who died over and over and over again. But given that at the absolute minimum, that's going to cost you 2 CP and 50 points a turn in that Custodes model dying, I think that that's an okay trade-off. Next up on the list is the Null Maiden Vigil. Now, I want to love the Null Maiden Vigil. I enjoyed the Sisters of Silence as a concept, and I think that they're very cool. I like it when codexes have these off detachments like the Kroot Hunting Pack or the Green Tide for Orcs that really enable a specific type of unit. But with its current design, I just can't like it. You can read about it more in my designer commentary, but the long story short is this detachment just does not currently push the rules hard enough to compensate for not having an actual army rule on the Sisters of Silence units. To remedy this, I am taking their Battle Shock shenanigans and I am cranking it to 11. And I am making Sisters have better offense and defense in this detachment to bring them more in lines with those Kroot Hunting Packs, Green Tides, and other detachments that focus entirely on one specific style of unit that doesn't have great support elsewhere in the Codex. Most of this detachment has been kept with the exact same goals, but we just increased its potency. Even with these changes, I'm not 100% sure that Null Maiden Vigil would be an incredible detachment, but at least now it won't be a detachment that hard loses to the lists and armies that it's meant to naturally counter, like Grey Knights and even Thousand Suns. Moving on to the Talons of the Emperor, I felt like this is a great in concept detachment. I love the idea of Custodes relying on Sisters for the nature of blanks to protect them from the warp, and the Sisters relying on Custodes to protect them with their superior physical prowess. I think that this is probably the best detachment that's in the actual Custodes Codex, but still I felt like it could be cranked up a little bit more. Now, to make this not feel like it's just a worse shield host, I needed to improve the power of the detachment's core rules. By making it have a 4-up Feel No Pain against psychic attacks and mortal wounds, it feels like it actually has a role because this is a detachment that is not currently designed to absorb devastating wounds. I also needed to make sure that I increased the durability of Sisters of Silence so that they could do a better job in protecting their Custodes brothers. Custodes being protectors for the Sisters is being better represented in the -1 to hit. Now, I did give this detachment a fights first stratagem since it doesn't have the same level of natural bulk as the Shield Host detachment does with its 5-up against mortals and devastating wounds. But it also helps the Sisters of Silence feel a little bit better protected against melee. It's also nice that with this detachment, you are able to get 2 separate units to have access to fights first, as opposed to the other detachments, which at most are going to have access to 1 fights first. I also wanted to give a nice little buff to Taloned Pincers to change it to allow movement back into engagement range. This is just going to add extra protection from ranged shooting, while also letting them feel like a much more lethal melee army in a way that doesn't just add flat damage to their strength, or their wound, or their AP, or their damage. The 5th detachment that I have for you is the Emperor's Executioners. Now, this is the current Custodes Codex Shield Host detachment, but I've renamed it to give it a better name that fits its offensive nature. Now, I've changed their Golden Wah to be at the start of your turn instead of the start of the battle round, so that it has a better chance of actually getting proper use and being a threat turn after turn, instead of just telling your opponent, I'm going to hit you if you don't back up in those games where you wind up going second. There really is no reason to have this ability be at the start of the battle round, because unlike the Orc's Wah, it doesn't give any kind of defensive benefit. There's no extra invuln save, no feel no pain. There's nothing that makes it actually have a benefit for being that start of battle round. Now, I did give this detachment access to a defensively oriented and conditional fights first, so that it is possible to get into melee with this army and still not be vulnerable to the fights first. But I also went ahead and I gave them a very powerful deep strike stratagem. Now, this is probably going to feel very strong, as it's going to make those charges from deep strike easier, but I believe that it's going to overall balance out, given that it is a very high CP cost, and the Custodes are kind of already able to do this with rapid ingress for 1 CP and then just walking at you fairly aggressively. It's already something that they're planning on doing. And because they don't have as many defensive tools as the other detachments are going to have, they really are going to be relying on that kind of all-out offense. The very last detachment that I have for you is a completely new from the ground up detachment for Custodes, the Cataphractoi Assault Force. This detachment is designed to actually give proper support to Virtus Praetors and take them from a unit that is never taken to one that has potential to be a very powerful unit in a good detachment. Now, on the surface, this detachment rule feels like it's going to give a lot of power between giving access to lethal hits, giving access to assault, and giving reroll advance rolls. But when you look at how a lot of the Custodes units are actually built with their rules, you'll see that many of them already have assault, many of them are already re-rolling advances, or in the case of Virtus Praetors will auto-advance 6, and it very quickly leads you to realize that the detachment gives most units around 2 bonuses like other detachments in most codices. Now, this detachment does give a particular amount of power to Dreadnoughts and Forge World models, and that should feel good for anyone who has those models, as they will be able to get use out of every one of those bonuses. I have also included additional buffs to the bikes on a datasheet level to really help bring them up to the power that it feels like they should be at. When we look at the datasheets, I also try to make sure that I kept it pretty close to where they were. I have seen other attempts at fixing the codex, making the datasheets far too powerful, and I wanted to make sure to avoid that. While the Custodes should feel very powerful on their datasheets, there is still a limit to how good they should be, and they should not be approaching Primarch levels. Now, while Castellan Axe did get a buff in the codex, which was very nice, it was still just not enough. When we look at the actual numbers, and you can see this from the Auspex Tactics video that he did on the change, we can very clearly see that this was just not enough to make the axes be on par with the spears. I've given it a little bit more of a buff so that the axes are the clear choice versus durable targets, and the spears are the obvious choice for larger hordes by taking them from AP1 to AP2. Additionally, I've made changes to all of the character datasheets to make sure that they are able to better operate on their own for the Orc champions by removing the while leading a unit requirement from a lot of their abilities. This just lets them all be solo units in case you want them to be able to function in that role. As I mentioned earlier, Shield Captain has been given 2 katas every turn, but no longer has access to his all 3 katas ability. I did apply a bit of a change to Trajan Valoris. I gave him back his ignore hit penalties and all other modifiers, but I took away his fights first. I think that overall this will still lead him to be in a stronger position, but it's not going to make him feel as oppressive as he was in the Index. Now, the biggest change that I think I put in the entire codex was the change to the Virtus Praetor ability. I made it so that it was actually able to be usable on vehicles and monsters. Now, given that Virtus Praetors are already good at killing infantry and can struggle with bigger targets, this change lets them put mortal wounds on the targets that would actually want to get these mortal wounds. If you were actually putting these mortal wounds on infantry or things like that, then what would often happen is even if you were theoretically able to advance and charge, it would just be very gross overkill. But with this change, you can actually have these Virtus Praetors pop mortals over a vehicle and monster and then go into some infantry, or you can have them pop it on the monster and then make sure that you can go and finish it off. There are a couple more changes inside of the PDF to datasheets, but they're a lot less notable and a lot more just kind of small tweaks. I have included some placeholder points, and I am fully aware that these points might be a little bit off. And so if you are testing this and you see that, hey, this unit feels like it is overperforming, please let me know. I want to make adjustments to this. I want this to feel like a living document that is able to be changed far more frequently than once every 3 months to every couple years. Now, on to the giveaway. The giveaway winner is going to be decided on July 1st. I will be creating a Facebook page where I will post the giveaway, and if you're familiar with Auspex Tactic, it's going to be handled in the very same way that he does his. Submissions will require a picture with a painted model if you have one, a name or user handle depending on what you want me to use for a winning announcement, as well as the date. Now, since a large goal for my channel is helping people who are interested in starting 40k begin, I know that there will be some people who won't have access to painted 40k minis. You are more than welcome to use any miniature you like, whether it's D&D, Age of Sigmar, a 3D print, or something that you've painted or drawn on canvas. The goal here is to mainly have something there to help prevent any attempts at people using bots. If you are posting multiple times, it is not going to result in multiple entries. For my paid supporters, you will automatically be entered. As a thank you for donating your money to help my project so far, I will be giving you $1 per entry in your supporter tier. So tier 1 supporters are going to get 3 entries, tier 2 will get 5 entries, and tier 3 supporters are going to get 25 entries. I will be using a random number generator to pick the winner, and the winner will be allowed to pick any 40k combat patrol that they want. This does include discontinued combat patrols, provided that I can find them for a reasonable price from a reputable site, and if I cannot find your first choice, I will work with you to find your second or third. Big shout out to all of my channel supporters who help make these videos possible, such as Comrade Chin, and everyone else who's been generous enough to support me. If you would like to try and help out the channel, please consider the links in the description where you can either check out the Amazon affiliate link or go support me on Ko-fi. Thank you all for watching.